quiz. So they are a little bit complicated, but once hopefully I explain, it's not too difficult. But you do need to know what blood types are, what makes people have different blood types, and what implications that means for when a person gets a blood transfusion. So you guys named for me earlier the various blood types, A, B, O, and then we usually put a positive or negative after that. That means something else. But those blood types are named because on the outside of basically all of our body cells, on the cell membrane, there are these little proteins, microscopic proteins, that are called antigens. And these antigens sort of advertise what type of cell it is. They identify your body's cells so that your immune system knows which cells to attack and which not to attack. For example, your skin cells, cells in your pancreas. Your own body generally does not attack those cells because it recognizes them. It sees these antigens, and your immune system says, okay, that's part of the body, that's safe. Then when you have some foreign cell gets in your body, a bacteria or a virus, your immune system recognizes the antigens and realizes, okay, this is not supposed to be here. It can then attack and destroy those pathogens. Well, on our blood cells, on the red blood cells, there are certain antigens that are called the A B group of antigens. And that's what gives blood types their name, okay? Which antigens are found on those blood cells. So there's many types of antigens. The ones we're generally concerned of are the AB antigens and the RH antigens. But there's two types that are responsible for our blood type. There's A antigens and there's B antigens. And they're each a little different from each other. They're different types of proteins. And so if a person's blood cells, they don't really look like these diagrams, but they can help us kind of visualize it. So if a person has on the red blood cells these type A antigens, they have type A blood. That's what we call it, when a person has A antigens on their red blood cells. If a person has B antigens, obviously then we say they have type B blood. If on the red blood cells they have a mixture of both A and type B antigens, that's AB blood. And then some people on the red blood cells, they don't have either A or B. So what's their blood type?
Negative.
Type O. So that gives us our four possible blood types. Type A blood, type B, type AB, or type O. It's just they're named after which of these antigens are present on the red blood cells. Olivia?
What's the most common blood type?
We'll talk about type O. In the United States, type O is the most common. I'll show you a graph in a few minutes about which are most common. Jake?
Is one blood type worse than the other?
Not really. We'll talk about what they mean in terms of transfusion stuff in a couple minutes. All right, so those are our blood types. That's common sense, sort of. But there's also an important factor to consider in that floating in our plasma, we also have something called antibodies. Antibodies are special proteins whose job it is to destroy and mark foreign cells. Like I was just talking about. If a bacteria gets into our body, antibodies can help destroy it. So also inside of our plasma, floating in the plasma with the red blood cells and all the other parts, we have some antibodies. Some of those antibodies might be antibodies that attack the type A antigens. Some are antibodies that attack the type B antigens. And if you have in your body antigens and the matching antibody, that's not good. Because those antibodies attack the antigens on your own blood cells and actually destroy them. The term for that is hemolysis, the destruction of the blood cells. And so that's bad. That can cause a person to become very sick or even die. So a person with type A blood, what type of antigens did we say is on the red blood cells? Yeah, A antigens. So do you think floating around in their plasma, they have antibodies that are going to attack A? No. They don't. They don't have any antibodies to attack A, because if they did, they would be attacking their own blood cells, and that doesn't happen. Which antibodies do you think they do have?
B.
B.
Yeah, they have antibodies that would attack B if there would be antigens present. A person with type B blood, which antigens are on the red blood cells?
B.
B. Which antibodies do you think are floating in their plasma?
A.
A. And then everything's fine. Because their antibodies don't match their antigens, no problem. All right, well, let's think about a person with type AB blood. Which antigens are on the red blood cells?
A.
Some A's and some B's. So now what do you think? What type of antibodies then would be in their plasma?
B.
Olivia?
B.
What? Well, O isn't an antigen or an antibody. So, Maria? Right. They don't have antibodies against A, and they also don't have any antibodies against B, because if they had either one, they would be attacking their own blood cells. So they don't have either of those antibodies.
What is that?
What?
Oh, it's that.
Just a dash saying they don't have any. And finally, a person with type O blood. On the red blood cell, what is there? Which,
Nothing.
right, no antigens. So what antibodies do they have?
Nothing.
They have both, because that's okay. They can have antibodies against A and against B, because their red blood cells don't have any antigens, so it's not a problem. So when a person just has their own blood, it's never a problem. They never have matching antigens and antibodies. This becomes important when, as you guys said in our question of the day, when a person is getting a blood transfusion. That's when this becomes important. Because if a person does get a blood transfusion and they end up with a mix of like antigens and antibodies, that's bad. That leads to the hemolysis, to their red blood cells being destroyed.
They can die.
They can die.
What if you mix blood?
So, hold on, we'll talk about this. So if you imagine a person with type O blood, now there's another important thing for me to tell you before we get into this. When a person gets a blood transfusion, so if somebody has a bad accident, they've lost a lot of blood, they may be rushed to the emergency room, they may immediately give them a transfusion of blood. This is blood that people donated, through a Red Cross blood drive or something like that. And so they immediately give them a blood transfusion. But when a person gets a blood transfusion, they don't give them all of the blood from a person. They only give them the red blood cells. The parts of the blood are separated out. So when a person gets a transfusion, they're just getting the red blood cells. Okay, so a person with type O blood. What antigens are on the red blood cell? None. So, if you put that into a person with type A blood, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, because there's no antigens on the type O blood cells. How about a person with type B blood?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about AB?
No. Yeah. No.
Yeah, because there's no antigens on the type O blood to attack. So, a person with type O blood can give blood to any of the other types. They're called the universal donor because it has no what? No antigens on the red blood cell. So anybody can receive it with no risk. Let's think about a person with type AB blood. What type of antibodies are floating around in their plasma?
Both. Or no.
None. No antibodies floating in their plasma, right? Because they have A and B antigens on the red blood cells. So, if they have no antibodies floating in their plasma, who can they receive blood from?
Type B.
Zero.
Caleb, why? You're right. He said everybody. What if you put type A blood into them?
Oh, it would just.
Do they have any antibodies to attack it?
No.
No. Same thing with type B, or O, or AB. Person with type AB blood is called the universal recipient. They can receive blood from anybody, and it's okay.
Oh, but they can't give it to everybody?
No.
Well, Mr. Durant,
Yes.
sometime I watched this movie, where these two two guys like split their hands and they like got a handshake because the guy got a bunch of diseases, something like that. Like,
Yeah, so some diseases can be transferred in blood. However, when a person donates blood at like a blood drive or something, they screen the blood to be sure there's no diseases that are transmissible through bodily fluids. So they make sure of that, and so the blood is screened for that.
What are some situations where you would need a blood transplant?
Basically, any major injury to your body, when you've bled extensively, you know, you have whatever, six pints or so of blood in your body. If you have a bad cut, if you're in a bad accident, if you're bleeding internally and you've lost a lot of blood, you can't survive unless you have an adequate supply to bring oxygen to all the parts of your body. So basically, a traumatic injury when you've bled a lot. So let's look at this table. This just sort of summarizes what we've talked about. A person with type A blood has A antigens on their red blood cells. Floating in their plasma, they have antibodies that would attack B. They can get a transfusion from who? A or
B. O.
type O. They
That's
can
what I was
receive blood
gonna say.
from either another type A person or type O, because remember, on type O blood, there are no antigens. So even these B antibodies, they would not attack the antigens on the O because there are none. How about a person with type B blood? They have B antigens on the red blood cell. They have antibodies against A. They can receive from who?
B.
B or O.
That B. O. Get it?
I have a question.
Hold on. A person with type AB blood. They have A and B antigens, but in their plasma, no antibodies. So they can receive from
AB.
anybody. A, B, AB, or O. They can receive from anybody. And finally, person with type O blood, the antigens, there aren't any, but they have both types of antibodies. Therefore, they can only receive from one person.
Oh.
Type O.
I said it right.
Correct.
Okay, I have a question. What's the, isn't there one that's a really rare kind of?
Some are rare. We'll look at that in a minute.
Yeah, what blood types are rare?
So this varies according to geographically, because blood type is passed on genetically from parents to offspring. So people tend to have blood type similar to their parents. In America, O is the most prevalent blood type. About 45% of people in the United States are type O blood. Type A blood is the second most common. And then B and AB are much smaller. So most 85% of people in the United States are either O or A.
I think I'm AB.
You might be.
I'm A.
Now, the
I'm A.
there's also another part of when we talk about blood type, and some of you mentioned this. Usually, if a person tells you their blood type, they're not just to say O or A or AB. What else do they say? Positive or negative. That's related to a separate antigen. Okay? There's another antigen that's important that we talk about, and it's in your file as well. It's something called Rh factor. Rh factor is just another protein, another antigen that's found on red blood cells. And some people have it, some people don't. They have this Rh factor. If a person has it, we say that they're positive, Rh positive. If they don't have those antigens, they're Rh negative. So if a person is, blood type is O negative, it means the red blood cells don't have the A antigens, they don't have the B antigens, and they don't have this Rh antigen as well. If it's not good or bad, it just is. And again, just like with the A and B antigens and antibodies, the same concepts hold true for these Rh factors, in that a person has to have the proper matching blood type in terms of the Rh factors, because there are antibodies floating in the plasma against Rh, and if they mix together, that's bad. This is mostly of concern to pregnant women, because women, when they become pregnant, their child, the fetus growing inside of them, might not be of a matching blood type. And there are situations in which the fetal cells can get into the mother's blood and cause a reaction in terms of these Rh antibodies, but that's beyond what we need to talk about. The word RH factor, that word, it comes from this, these proteins were discovered in a type of monkey called the rhesus monkey. And that's where RH comes from. All right, so let's finish up here today. We're going to talk about, most of what we're going to talk about in the next few slides is review, but there will be some new stuff here. So some of this I'll ask you and some I'll give you. So red blood cells. What is their function? This is certainly something you should know for your quiz. Mary? Yeah, they carry oxygen. Where are these blood cells produced, like all the other parts of the blood? Jake?
In bone marrow.
They're produced in the bone marrow, inside of the long bones of the body.
I had it.
And there are times when a person may not have enough red blood cells, or their blood cells are not carrying enough oxygen. They may be frequently tired and not have any energy. They may be lightheaded. The name for this, you know what it's called?
Diabetes.
No, that's about glucose. Anemia. The name for that is anemia.
Oh
A
yeah.
lack of red blood cells. And it could be because of too few red blood cells, or it may be due to a problem with the molecule that actually holds on to oxygen. Does anyone remember the name of it? It contains a metal that we need in our diet.
Iron.
The metal is iron.
Gold.
The molecule that holds it,
Heart.
hemoglobin. Good, Rosie. Hemoglobin.
So different.
Hemoglobin is the actual molecule that's found in our red blood cells that holds on to the oxygen. It has iron in it. The shape of a red blood cell, I call it frisbee shape. It's rounded, it's flattened. So what red blood cells look like.
Are we gonna look at any?
No. And a red blood cell, okay, it lasts for about 120 days. So they don't live forever. And once they're sort of outlived their useful life, they're broken down by the liver. And sort of the components are recycled. So we are constantly in our bones producing new blood cells. In our liver, our spleen are constantly breaking down old blood cells. And we have so many blood cells, billions and billions, that 2 million are broken down or created every second in our bodies. So there's huge turnover in red blood cells.
How many blood cells do we have?
Billions of them.
Sure, how do they know all this?
Just by studying, if you take a sample of blood and you know how much there is and you count the blood cells, you then can extrapolate that to how much blood we have in our body. White blood cells. What is their job? What is their function? Raise your hand, please. Haley. They're our immune system. They're our pathogens against bacteria, viruses, things that can make us sick.
It's made in the bone marrow.
And they're made in the bone marrow. And there's lots of types of white blood cells. Some are similar to an amoeba in that they can go surround and engulf bacteria and other pathogens in our body. Okay? They can change their shape.
Is that what they look like?
Yes, there's a bunch of different types. Some of them look like this that would engulf and destroy a pathogen. Some produce special chemicals that fight off infection. And the technical term for a white blood cell is called a leukocyte. And a common form of cancer that affects people's leukocytes
I know it.
is leukemia. Correct. So leukemia is a cancer that affects those white blood cells.
Wait, what does leukemia do?
It causes a person to have a compromised immune system so they can get sick very easily. Their white blood cells are not functioning.
My grandma had that.
That's because of treatments for cancer, not because of cancer itself.
Wait, is that a real picture?
Yeah. And white blood cells there's not nearly as many white blood cells as there are red blood cells. They're outnumbered by about 700 to 1. So there's many more red blood cells, but a lot of new white blood cells can be created when we have an infection.
How come it comes out liquidy?
The next part of our blood are the platelets. Platelets are responsible for what, Rosie? Our blood clotting. Remember, clotting helps stop us from bleeding. Called a scab if it's on the outside of your body.
I have a scab.
And these platelets are formed in the bone marrow.
How many bone marrow?
And these only last for about a week. Platelets have to constantly be created.
Do we need bone marrow to live?
Yeah, because we need all these parts of our blood. And so there are diseases in which a person's platelets don't work properly. It's called hemophilia. And in hemophilia, a person could get a cut or an injury and could bleed much more than a person with healthy platelets because the platelets aren't functioning properly. They bruise very easily because they can have bleeding under the skin due to just a little damage. So what happens is when there's injury or damage to a blood vessel, these platelets start to clump together. They start to sort of form a net over the injury, and then blood cells start to collect there, and that forms the clot, which seals it off so it stops bleeding.
What about nosebleed?
Same thing, it's when there's a blood vessel inside of your nose that's close to the surface, for some reason breaks open and bleeds, and then you put pressure on it, eventually the platelets clot, and that bloody nose stops. And that forms a clot, also called a scab. And here you see irregular blood, and here after the platelets have clumped together.
Wait, what about scars then?
Yep, because you're taking away. You're not done yet, we got one more slide, so don't put your stuff away. All right, last one, plasma, the last part of our blood.
No.
So plasma is the liquid part of our blood. It transports all the other stuff. What's it made of mostly?
Water.
It's water. It's mostly water. And it's most of our blood is actually this plasma. It's about 55% of our blood. And so its job is to sort of carry the platelets and carry the red blood cells and white blood cells, but also this is where nutrients are dissolved. In the plasma is where you would find glucose, vitamins, minerals. They dissolve in this liquid. If you take a sample of blood, spin it very quickly, you could, this is called centrifuging, you can split up the components of the blood. The red blood cells sink to the bottom, the plasma stays on the top. So this is the plasma, it's this yellowish sort of color. Now normally if it's not centrifuged, it's mixed together with the various types of blood cells and just looks like a red liquid. Jake? Yeah.
Why do we never get out of that?
Why don't we?
Yeah, because it's like a big hole.
Yeah, because it's sealed up and it heals when you're an infant. This, we'll talk about it in our next section. Here's a picture of the various types of blood, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets.